Ever since the release of Super Mario Maker in 2015, this game has been one of my favorite games of all time. While I was already a fan of Super Mario games in general, what I always loved to do was to create my own game ideas. So when this game released, it combined two of my most favorite things: Super Mario and being creative and building something unique. Being able to create your own levels and also seeing what amazing ideas other level creators were able to come up with was one of the greatest gaming experiences I've ever had. And although Super Mario Maker offers a great variety of possibilities, I quickly also got to experience its limits. It is mainly designed for creating single levels. Even though Super Mario Maker 2 added features like the World Maker in the Super Worlds, they still are just a collection of individual levels. There's no storytelling, no connection between levels or worlds, or anything that makes a super world really feel like one big adventure. Even the longest puzzle, exploration, or whatever kind of level you can make still has to fit into a 500 seconds time frame. For shorter levels, there might be ways to include storytelling by writing out text in blocks. However, then you will soon end up facing another limitation of Mario Maker: building space. But why am I telling you this? I don't want to criticize Super Mario Maker. For me, it is still one of the greatest games ever, and I really hope that at some point Nintendo will decide to create Mario Maker 3. The point that I want to make is that while it is fun to make these short little levels and share them with other players, I always wanted to create something bigger, an entire experience, a full game. So what kind of game do I have in mind? My favorite game genre since I discovered it is the Metroidvania genre, a game where I explore one huge interconnected world map, discover different areas, fight bosses, and learn new abilities. Games like Ori and the Blind Forest, Hollow Knight, or Axiom Verge always fascinated me with their clever world design and how exploring a wide range of areas that each have their very own look and feel can really feel like one massive adventure if the individual areas are connected in the right way. And what I always especially liked about Metroidvania games in comparison to open world games, which are also about exploring a huge map and discovering secrets, is the backtracking aspect. While a game like Tears of the Kingdom surely has a lot of areas to visit and treasures to find, you get all of the core abilities to navigate around the world right at the beginning of the game, before the rest of the world is actually opened up to you. However, seeing an obstacle that you cannot destroy yet, a platform that is just too high to jump to with your current skills, or just anything that you know you cannot interact with yet, but have to come back to at a later point, always leaves this spark of mystery in my mind that stays there until I'm finally able to come back and pass the obstacle. So for me, it's clear that I want to make a Metroidvania game. But where should I start? What should a game look and feel like? Well, in order to answer that question, I've taken a look at some of my favorite games, picked out my favorite aspects about them, and also what I maybe did not like to define how I want my game to be. So let's take a look at what I figured out that made these games feel so great to me when I played them. Starting with Axiom Verge, I feel like what this game captures really well is the overall ambience. The world just looks very mysterious and strange, however, still somehow fitting. Generally, I think the theme of you being on a faraway planet, exploring unknown territory and fighting alien creatures is something that fits this genre very well. Something I also like about Axiom Verge is the wide variety of weapons. Even though most of them are completely optional, they still all provide some fresh experiences in combat. What I did not like, on the other hand, is that at least some of the puzzles seemed very random to me. I remember seeing one area that I just could not get to, and eventually I looked up the solution, and the solution was to use a special gun which can glitch and manipulate the behavior of enemies on one enemy in that specific room, which would cause it to start displaying letters, which were then the code you had to enter to open up this area. I'm not aware if there's maybe a hint somewhere in the game that I might have missed. However, at least when I looked up the solution, it seemed pretty random to me. Continuing with Hollow Knight, what this game probably does best out of any Metroidvania I've ever played is having a very open world design. In my opinion, the ideal Metroidvania really does not have in any order in which you have to get the different abilities. And while of course, especially in the beginning, similar to the open world game, it might be helpful to lead the player to at least the first one or two abilities that he does not feel completely lost. Many Metroidvanias sadly seem to keep that structure throughout most of the game. Of course, they still feature backtracking, but the relevant parts of the game are found in a quite linear order. However, this is not at all the case in Hollow Knight. The world design of this game is just so clever that no matter where you go, there's always something new and also important to discover. There are not just optional goodies like treasure chests or health upgrades, there are entire optional areas that you might not even find until after you've beaten the final boss. And also, out of all of the different Metroidvania maps that I've seen, the one from Hollow Knight is definitely the one with the most connections between the different areas. Another part that I love about Hollow Knight is the amount of bosses. While most games don't have that many bosses at all, or just use stronger versions of bosses that you've already defeated previously, the amount of unique bosses, each having their own attack patterns and weaknesses, is just mind-blowing. What I love and hate about these bosses at the same time is their difficulty. On the one hand side, I very much appreciate that you really have to learn to fight each and every boss and understand their attack patterns in order to defeat them. You cannot just spam the attack button or hide in some secret safe spot. You constantly have to move around, dodging enemy attacks and waiting for the right moment to strike back. However, at least for me personally, the bosses are a bit too hard, and most of the time I was already quite frustrated when I finally beat them. However, if I try to make things different, I would probably just give my bosses less health, because as I said, their challenging attack patterns and unique movements are what I really liked about them. Finally, one more game that I want to talk about that inspired me a lot is Tunic, which might surprise you as Tunic is not really a Metroidvania game. However, the reason why I like this game very much is that it also kind of gives you that feeling of exploration, and it maybe even does that better than most Metroidvania games do. As in most games, you are at least given some kind of goal. So mostly the mystery and exploration is then just about figuring out where you have to go. However, Tunic pretty much does not use any language. Most text, signs, and even instructions on newly obtained abilities are written in an own in-game language that you don't really understand throughout most of the game. So on top of not exactly knowing where to go, Tunic also adds the mystery that you can never really be sure about what you can even do with your current abilities. For example, later in the game, you learn that you can find certain directional input codes by looking at things in the environment to open secret doors. However, it's not like a typical Metroidvania ability where you can only overcome the obstacle once you've learned the ability. It's more like a knowledge checkpoint, because technically you could have used these codes all the time already. You just did not even know about the whole input code system and what things in your environment you need to pay attention to. Like for the bosses in Hollow Knight, personally, especially some of the puzzles in the later game are just too complicated for me. Especially, I remember one part that I also had to look up, which was in the end figuring out a 100-digit directional input code. And even though, unlike an Axiom Verge, the solution of how to figure out the code was understandable, it was just something that I would have never figured out on my own. So to wrap things up, what I'm trying to create is a Metroidvania set in some mysterious environment which offers lots of places to explore, bosses to fight, and weapons to use, also including some puzzle mystery elements like, for example, hidden abilities, while avoiding making the combat or the puzzles too hard or random, which will of course be a challenge as difficulty always feels different for every player. Something that's coming in as an additional challenge is the fact that I want to do this game completely on my own, meaning that I will do all the story writing, art, music, and coding and everything else myself. If I use any custom assets or resources, then probably just for very small things like sound effects or maybe fonts. Finally, after all this analysis, where do I see the main challenges in attempting this? As I generally try to keep this a low budget game, which means I'll be working with mostly free or low price software, money will not be a problem. The only resource that I will probably need a lot of is time. However, as I'm doing this as a hobby and not as a full-time job, I don't have any deadlines, so technically I can just make the game until I think it's ready to be released. However, on the other hand, that of course also means that the progress on this game will probably be very slow, as I will mainly be working on this game on the weekends or whenever I have some free time. Currently, the two biggest issues I see are art and scope creep. While I'm starting to become more confident with my smaller pixel art creations, like for example tiles for a tile set, I still think I have to learn a lot about drawing bigger objects or even background images and stuff like that. Also, animation and drawing living and moving people or creatures is still something I would not consider myself great at. However, as I expect this entire game to take several years anyways, I also still have quite some time to improve, as graphics can easily be replaced later on in development. The other issue I feel like I will be facing is scope creep. One of the hardest things for me has always been to clearly define what should be part on one of my game ideas and what not. Whenever I play a new game with a cool new mechanic, I very easily throw everything I have been working on so far away and start from scratch, trying to somehow include that new idea or mechanic into my existing idea. I've been trying to make my own games for quite some time already. However, I think in the end, the fact that during the implementation of one idea, I already had 7 new ideas was always the reason I lost interest in my projects and were never able to finish even one of them. However, we'll see how it goes with this one. As I've just started my journey with this game, I unfortunately do not have anything to show off yet. However, I just wanted to let you know about my plan to make a game and that this project will from now on be the future of this channel. And as I mentioned, the progress will be very slow, so there might be several months between videos. Anyways, that's it for this episode. I hope you liked the idea, and I hope to see you next time for the first actual devlog about my game.